Greetings, family. This is Kyle Dixon, co-founder of Precise Minds Filmworks, educator for 20 plus years, cultural enthusiast.
And I'm KAYODE Bentley, president and founder of 4T's Teaching Teens to Think, whose mission is to help inner city youth identify their inherent skill sets in order to complete their education, establish a career, and ultimately start a business, if they choose to. Professor at Fordham University, where I teach students who are pursuing their master's degree in social justice.
And with that said, welcome to the Grand Rising Collective, a podcast whose purpose is to cultivate greatness and excellence within ourselves and our communities. The name itself is from the morning greeting of Grand Rising, which we interpret as starting off the day with a greatness mindset so that we are able to rise to the occasion of whatever obstacles and challenges we may face.
And that's why we focus on engagement, relevant information, and empowerment for people in our communities who want to be and do better in their daily lives.
Welcome to the Grand Rising Collective.
So, Trudy, I'm gonna just jump right in, right? This is how we do it. I'm gonna jump right in. So, tell us a little bit about your background, like how did you come up, like how'd you get interested in science? Just give us a little bit of background on yourself.
Yeah, sure. My bachelor's, I attended Winthrop University. I have a bachelor's of science in biology.
Mhm.
I also have a master's of business administration from Capella University. And I also have a master's of education in curriculum and instructions through applied behavior analysis, specializing in autism spectrum disorder.
Mhm.
Um, how I kind of got into the science industry. I actually became interested in science when I was a little girl working with my grandmother in the garden. Every
Mhm.
year she would plant a garden. So I would always work with her in that garden. And during that time, um, she didn't do a lot of explanation, but just being and doing and having the hands on just kind of cultivate my love of plants and the soil and just, the environment and how all of that plays into sustainable living, because that's what gardening really, really is. Early on, I decided that I wanted to, major in biology. Um, and once I finished my degree, when I was in the industry, I knew I always wanted to be in pharmaceuticals. That was one of the industries that was the most interesting to me. So I kind of fell into it really. Just initially working with American Red Cross, and then I moved through the industry from there. I How I actually got into the field of quality assurance was
Mhm.
through a supervisor I had that was actually I was consulting with their company temporarily, and he encouraged me to study quality assurance, which I had no interest in it. I thought it was the most boring thing in the world. I just
Mhm.
didn't see how could that have any impact on my life. But it was at Roche Diagnostics, and it was a gentleman named Bill Ackland. He encouraged me. He encouraged me by paying for my certification, my coursework, to study to become a quality assurance manager slash auditor. And from there, once I went back for the exam, I got it, and then my career just moved on from there. I think my income probably increased by 60 or 70%
Wow.
just with that little, yeah, that was a big impact just by that little nudge and influence. But as for, what I do with science, I found that science has really become my whole background
Mhm.
in everything I do. Even just doing household chores, I'm always incorporating something from the science field. If it's
Mhm.
cooking, to me, using a recipe is nothing but a big science experiment. And I kind
Mhm.
of curtail that in with even with my son. I'm able to take recipes and we manipulate them, and then we document what we do just to give that theory of science or documentation of data. Um, I'm During the fall season, I'll collect fruit flies and we'll
Hmm.
start doing gene mapping with the fruit flies.
Wow.
Um, I recently, probably in the last year or so, I started drinking kombucha. Now I
Mhm.
grow my own. So it sits there and then we watch it and we see and we, talk about the different, aspects of what's going on with kombucha.
Mhm.
Um, so, it's like I said, I use it in every aspect of my life. And there's not daily, he and I are actually discussing something about science, which I contribute that type of lessons based on what my grandmother did with me.
Mhm. Wow. Wow, that's rich. It's like, wow.
Can I
And
jump in real quick, Kyle?
sure, sure. I was about to jump in, but I mean, go ahead.
Mhm.
I got you. This thought quicker because I didn't think I would even have a lot of questions so soon.
Mhm.
Trudy, one of the questions that I want to ask, which is, and you may be able to relate to this to some degree or not.
Mhm.
I run across a lot of inner city youth
Mhm.
who don't know what they want to do. And it was
Mhm.
interesting to hear you say that you really had no interest in quality assurance. You had no interest in this field at first until
Right.
someone, introduced you to it or exposed you to it. And you found out that this was the greatest decision you could have ever made in your life. Not only did it fulfill you personally, but it also fulfilled you financially. So the advice or the question I would like to ask is what suggestion or advice or what would you say to young people who are struggling to find out, where their path is in life, because a
Mhm.
lot of these young people are, if they're not pursuing their education or taking it seriously, are out here hustling or whatever the case may be, their life is over before they know it. So what advice could you give them on what path they could take on a more structural way or what have you, that can help them kind of experience the success that you've experienced on your path? I don't know if that was a clear question, but I hope you got the
Yeah,
idea.
it was. Yeah, it was. And I could definitely say, one of the challenges that, I face being in the pharmaceutical industry, and we'll probably elaborate on this a little more, is
Mhm.
the lack of African American presence in the industry. So
Mhm.
several times when I even mention, because I know there's some students that, I talk to at colleges, and when I mention what they do, they look at me like, I could have never thought I could do that with a biology degree.
Mhm.
So, the one thing I would definitely say to young people is if you can be in a situation where you come in contact with someone, ask them what they do. You'll be really surprised as to what they tell you, especially if you're in a more structured environment like a school.
Mhm.
One thing I would recommend, and this might be a little forward thinking for a 13 or 14-year-old, but ask your school if they would have professionals come in that look like you.
Mm,
I know it's probably been a year or two ago at my son's school, they had career day, and they wanted me to speak, and I had the opportunity to speak to several students across several grades.
Mhm.
And at the end of my discussion, one of the students who was probably like in the fifth grade, she came to me and she goes, I want to be an engineer. And I was like, do
Nice.
you? And she was like, yeah, how can I be
Nice.
an engineer? So, she and I had that discussion. And I told her, I said, in the next couple of months, I'm going to check up on you. I'm going to ask you, did you read this book and that book? Or did you talk to your science teacher and things like that? And I think probably a year later, she comes to me and she goes, hi, Miss Trudy, I still want to be an engineer. And I've been reading this book. So, I mean, it's really,
That's good. That's good.
enlightening to know that. So that's one thing I would suggest. Also, too, I would suggest to young people who are trying to find their way. I know it's so redundant. Read. I'm a very big reader, so a lot of things that I just discovered just by reading and then just doing more research on it, just on my own. If I have one topic that I'm looking at, then I'm always researching it more and more and more. And in that way, you find an interest or you find something that you otherwise wouldn't find.
Mhm.
beautiful,
Cool.
beautiful.
Yeah. Definitely. And Trudy, I mean, you hit on so many things right there, because, you know, we as educators, I talk to my students all the time about encouraging them to read. And one thing I used to say that I stopped saying, that said, you know, these young folks, they don't read. And that's a lie. They do read. It's just that the type of reading that they're doing is not a variation of different topics or different genres.
Right.
And they're reading like online, they're reading blogs, they're reading like these
Right.
these like short form articles like that. So it's a different way you have to approach in reference of getting them to encouraging them to read. And also you have to find something they really like, they really enjoy and are passionate about.
Right.
And what you said brought back a memory for me, like for that young girl to see you like physical and to talk to her, I'm sure that's really inspiring, because, you know, we're in Black History Month, African American History Month, and we get inspired by people who have done things, but it seems like it's like in the past, like it's way in the past, and you're like somebody live in color, like right now, that she can say like, wow, like she's doing it, you know. And I can talk to her.
Right. She's right here at my school. And then, like I said, I know a lot of, I mean, on the street, no one would know what I do. But it has to be those type of forums where, you know, children or young people they're seeing people that look like them that are doing these type of careers. You know, not everyone's going to be a doctor. Not everyone's going to be an attorney, or, you know, so forth. But as far as I'm concerned, everybody can major in biology. You know, everybody can do what I do. You know, it just takes, you know, it takes time and a little bit of effort.
Very good. Very good.
And Trudy, I want to ask this too. Like, so in reference of your title, like quality assurance, was a quality assurance engineer. Like, what is it really? Like, because, you know, people would think of like the title and like, oh, like that seems just so like this grand thing. So like, what is it like, and what does that entail?
Well, it is this grand thing.
Oh, yeah.
It is this grand thing.
Yes.
And you know, and like I said, some people in the pharma industry and medical device industry still don't get it. Well, okay, let me break it down to you. So I'm pretty sure everyone's been hearing a lot in the media lately about the FDA. The FDA says this, the FDA says that.
Right. Yes.
So pharmaceutical, medical device, biotech, clinical research companies, they all have these regulations that they must follow. And all of these regulations are administered, or these guidelines are set by the FDA. Well, you have the FDA, you have the ICH, which is international harmonization, or international quality and harmonization, and you have ISO. But the main focus is the FDA. So depending on what industry that you're in, or for the most part, the FDA requires that a company has to have an independent unit that oversees everything that they do.
That's good. Yeah.
So they have to have their own checkpoint outside of the FDA checking behind them. So that's where I come in, because I'm in that group or that department, which is typically called the Quality Assurance Department. And what I typically do is come into an organization, and whatever compliance or regulatory standards that have to be met, I make sure they meet those standards. Okay. So part of one of the standards, as I stated, is that you have to have a quality unit. Within those quality units, they have a quality system. So there has to be components that fall into that, which is validation, document or control document, capital and complaints, where they have to do checks and balances on themselves, audits that they have to have within their organization that audits those. What's another? The regulatory department, and sometimes product release, which falls on the QA and training and some other things. So all those components are what we call a quality system. Okay. So what I do as a quality engineer, I come in and I design those systems for companies at some point. Or I may come in and be their validation person, their quality validation, or their quality capital and complaint. or the quality person that reviews their or write their SOPs for their processes.
Mhm.
So that's kind of like how that all kind of plays into the whole body of the industry. And
Wow.
all companies have it. Food companies have it.
Mhm.
Cosmetic companies have it. Chemical companies have quality assurance departments. Even the airlines have a quality assurance department. But it's just certain regulations that they have to follow. So part of my job is I have to know those regulations.
Okay. Wow. And are those, ooh, wow, yeah, that's a lot. And are those regulations they're set by the government, if I'm correct? Yes, they're set by certain.
Yes, it's set by the government because if what could happen if a company doesn't follow those, let's say a
Mhm.
pharmaceutical company,
Yeah.
they can issue certain warnings for them or fines, or may even shut them down.
Mm.
Or if, like in the instance with some of these vaccines that are coming out as of recently, if the vaccines haven't been properly monitored or properly what we call QA, then the FDA won't approve it.
Mm.
Oh,
So
that's a
those
lot.
systems have to be in place to follow that.
Wow.
That's a lot. That's a lot. That's a lot. How important is it for African Americans to, just say, for example, explore this field of quality systems or quality insurance? Is that something we as African Americans should look into, take seriously, and to some extent flood?
I would say yes. I would say yes. It's so funny because right before I got on the call or got on with the discussion with you all today, I was talking to one of my friends. She's a chemist. And that's the very thing we talked about. And she was just saying, like, she's a chemist in a lab. And she
Mhm.
always knew we were doing quality assurance. That's the one thing she and I talked about, how little African American are, presence there is in the pharmaceutical or in the science field, or
Mhm.
I would say more so pharmaceutical medical device field. You do find a lot of African Americans in the science perspective, probably more on the federal side,
Mm.
more than corporate. Corporate can be a little difficult to get into because, like I said, no one's walking on the street saying, "I work at such and such and I do this." It's just not as known. But I would definitely say yes. It's I try to encourage other African Americans who, especially ones who are just graduating from college, yeah, come into the field. We need more African Americans there because our interest is being underrepresented. I just know an instance as of several years ago, I was working for a company, and it was during the time where the hurricane hit really bad over in Haiti. It was a really bad
Yeah.
hurricane. So
Yeah.
one of my coworkers came to me and said, "We have this expired drug. We're just going to ship it over to Haiti." And I was
Mhm.
like, well, that's unethical. There's
Mhm.
guidelines under the FDA that we have to follow that we can't do that. I said, and first then you have to ask yourself, are you just doing that because this is a country, quote unquote, for blacks? Or
Right.
would you want this done to your family as well? And I mean, I asked that hard question.
Yeah.
And they were like, okay, whoa. But those are the questions, that's an interest that if somebody of color wasn't there, wouldn't have
Right.
followed through.
Mhm.
Yes.
Mhm.
It just
Yeah.
wouldn't have followed through. And there's other instances where we come up where the ones of us who are in the industry, we actually say that we actually voice our opinion. They're saying that, okay, you did this study, but how many African Americans were on it? Or if I'm out auditing a study and I'm looking at how it's managed, I'm looking at how diverse the population is for that, in that research population.
Mhm.
And then we'll sometimes ask the question, could you not find a child with or someone with the same disease that same age that meet these requirements who's African American or who's of color? So
Mhm.
but a lot of companies really do make a big stride to make sure it's very diverse. Some disease states there's only focus on one ethnic group, but
Mhm.
in the situations where you don't have that, we definitely push. We're here to make that voice.
Nice. Yeah, because that was going to be, you kind of answered my question in a sense. 'Cause I was going to ask how much not only being in those positions, but how much our voice is heard in those positions. Because especially when you some of the experience, I talked to one of my colleagues and kind of mentors, and he was telling me that a lot of these studies, as we know, as African Americans and just people of color, that a lot of these studies on Caucasian males and mostly and females. So when they give out these statistics, it's mostly based on their dynamics, their genealogies, and biology. So like you're saying, like being in those positions and being able to speak on those things, especially with a country like Haiti, which is a very rich country, by the way, but the history and reference of they're dealing with France and Spain and whatnot. But no, that right there really lets me know like that we really need to be in those spaces to be able to speak up and be heard and change the dynamics a little bit. So Trudy, like in reference of that, like going into what we talked about in reference of COVID, right? So what were some of your first dealings with hearing about the virus, being behind the scenes, dealing with the quality assurance, dealing with, these certain companies and regulations? When did you first hear about like COVID-19?
Well, COVID-19, I really didn't first hear about it until around November of 2019.
Okay.
But I was very familiar with these avian type viruses, bird flu, SARS, MERS, probably as early as 2002. So, but it's like I said, I'm in the industry. And what I've heard about it was just, there's this, in hearing about it back in 2019, it was just primarily, this is this drug, this is this virus, is going to be bigger than your quote unquote typical influenza. We need to start looking at preparations for it. N95 masks, disinfectant wouldn't be available, and things like that. And honestly, just to even talk about, the pandemic, even in and of itself, I was hearing about a pandemic back when I was in college.
Wow.
And I'm not going to tell y'all when that was. But
that was 5 years ago, right? That was just 5
years ago.
Yeah, just 5. Just 5.
Back in college. And I remember explicitly in our microbiology class where we had a discussion about there was going to be a shortage of gas masks. There was going to be a shortage of PPE and things of that sort. So it's a mystery to me why we as a country, quote unquote, a Western country such as the US, has come up a little short on some things, because this is something where, it was pounded in my education since, for a very long time.
So let me get this straight. COVID-19, this virus that's out, was known before March and even before November. It was
so technically it was called coronavirus. So the coronavirus strain has been out for, like I said, I heard about it as early as 2002.
Wow.
And we got blindsided in 2020 and put on COVID and all this when it was known about way back then. That baffles me. I don't understand that.
Yeah.
I don't connect. But
right.
I'll proceed more. I don't want to get into politics, but
well, it's one of those things where, here again, now that everyone's talking about it, that everyone's starting to understand. Like before, people just kind of brushed science and biology under the rug, that it meant nothing. And no one really knew how much of an impact this industry or this field or this specialty actually has on their life. Because, it's a lot to understand. It's a lot to grasp. And when you start talking about one thing, you always got to break it down to that little thing. So, and, it has to be something you have to build on and kind of learn and just to really have a firm grasp on what's going on.
Thank you so much. All right, so let me lead into this one. Now, there has been a lot of apprehension with regards to the vaccine for various reasons. The Tuskegee experiment, and we can go on. Can you help remove some of the ignorance? And I'm guilty of it myself. I'm gonna be honest.
Same here. I'm
just gonna say I don't trust these doctors. I'm sorry, the medical industry. But I digress. Can you explain to us? I think there's a nanotech they're using within the vaccine. What does that mean? Why are they using it, and how are they using it to help give the populace a clearer understanding of what this vaccine is, how it can benefit them, and in many ways, maybe it doesn't benefit others. Can you clarify that or shed some light on that?
Okay. Nanotechnology, like I said, I've been in research, and one of the big questions that, like you said, a lot of people ask is how much research has really been done on this? Well, nanotechnology was actually introduced back for treatment of cancer. So it's actually has been in the mix for a while. More specifically within regards to the vaccine, is actually a theory that has been explored probably within the last 2 years in dealing with other diseases. That's kind of similar to viruses, to a virus of this magnitude. So to explain what nanotechnology is, and I laugh because it's not as cut and dry as some people it may appear, but I'm gonna try my best to kind of generalize this as much as I can.
Okay.
So if you understand, if you take, let's take the human, and you know that you have your layer of skin. Okay. So a cell essentially has a layer of skin, which is called the cell membrane. Animal cells have a cell membrane. They have 2 cell membranes on the outer and the inner. And then a plant just has the cell wall because they have the layer of cell in it. So what nanotechnology is that you have these little lipid nanoparticles, and lipids can attract to certain proteins based on their covalent bond, or based on the bond that they have. I'm gonna take out covalent because I have to be real clear about that. So based on the bond that they have, you can actually convert a lipid into a protein if you do a certain type of bond. So what the nanotechnology does is that it creates this little bag, and inside is the messenger RNA, which is a protein. Right? So whenever they introduce the lipid nanoparticles or the vaccine that's the nanotech into the body, what happens is that every cell that has possibly been infected by the virus, it actually can identify what that where the virus is, and it can attack to that virus.
Wow.
Based on the antibodies that may be composed into the lipid, and once it attaches to that virus, then the lipid nanoparticle can cross into the virus, attack and kill it.
Oh wow!
So essentially, the same thing happens with if you have a cell that's actually been damaged by the virus, it can actually recognize a good initially healthy cell that's been invaded by the virus and go in, and their hope is to be able to correct or reverse the damage to that cell.
Wow.
That's nice.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
No, you broke that. That was a pretty thorough breakdown.
Very thorough. Real quick, Cal, I forgot the name of this movie. But what fascinated me was the actual makeup of the body and how complex and intricate it is. whereas a virus can come in and, of course, destroy whatever's in its path. But an antibiotic or a vaccine can actually into the body, in a cell, and identify what's wrong, like white blood cells, kind of heal the body. Like if you get cut, it's the white blood cells, if I'm not mistaken, that
Right.
the bleeding from bleeding out and things. Just the makeup of the body is just amazing to me, how through all the veins and the lipids, like you said, and the vessels, how our body works, and how these vaccines can come in and attack the source in this body that we have wherever it's located. I think it's amazing.
Fascinating.
No, and I tease my friends because I was like, I don't want to nerd out on anybody, but like I said, I see these things and I visualize it, so that's where I'm able to understand. Like I said, you can go into a lot more detail about it, in terms of the type of cells that can be affected. That's why and one of the questions a lot of people ask is, why are some people possibly dying from it and some aren't?
Right.
It all comes down to, well, I wouldn't say the vaccine, but the virus in and of itself, because it just all comes down to at what point the inflammation comes into play. And then the inflammation in the body is a normal reaction to a virus. The problem that runs into it is that when you have inflammation in certain areas of the body, it can become hazardous or harmful. And at the rate that the virus attacks, let's say, your lungs, because you have bronchioles in your lungs, and you never want to get to the point where you're having inflammation of bronchioles and those alveoli, because it's really hard to get the inflammation out. And it takes several rounds of antibiotics and so forth, steroids and things of that sort, to kind of reverse that reaction. But that's a natural reaction of the body. So that's like when someone says, those targeted groups, why they're more susceptible to this, is because their bodies aren't able to, or their bodies at a rapid rate are producing this inflammation. And it's about how quickly you can move to prevent that from happening. Or if you have, like I said, just certain population groups, where it may promote lack of cell regeneration. So that can also affect how well someone will have a reaction to a virus once it enters their body.
Wow.
And that's across the board. That's with any virus. That's with any virus.
Wow. Sorry, Cal, I gotta ask this real follow-up question. So so Trudy, what you just enlightened me and brought to my attention was, I'd never associated inflammation in the body to a virus or an attack on my body in any way. Like I associated inflammation if I run and I trip, and I sprain my ankle swells up, or there's inflammation there. And I understood it to that level. I didn't know that if I don't trip and fall, or there's a swelling in a part of my body, that's an indication of a virus or an attack. Is that close to being accurate, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty accurate, the way to look at it. Because it's the same way, like if you get a cut, and you were mentioning earlier about how the white blood cells go to that area to greater defense. And then you may see it go unattended. You may see it may feel hot, or you may see it start turning white, or you may see it start doing certain other things. That's all the body is doing, is a reaction that's taking care of itself. Sometimes it's best just to leave it alone and let it play out. And sometimes if you see where it may be getting worse, or you can't keep it properly clean so it can perform the act that it's supposed to do, then you may need some neosporin or antibacterial cleaner, just to make sure the area is clean so that the body can do what it needs to do. But yeah, inflammation is a natural response. I mean, think about it when you get a cold and you start getting congested. That's a natural response from the body. We don't like it, but it's a natural response of the body. because sometimes it can lead to infections and things of that sort where you have to have certain treatments. But it's like I said, inflammation is a natural uh, occurrence of the body.
Man.
It's the way the body defends itself.
Yeah.
This is Trudy, y'all.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Coming with it. Oh, so wow. So Trudy, so right. So with the inflammation, right, we know the body's natural reaction to viruses, infections. What is it? What is the connection with the ventilator then? Because I know some people say, well, the ventilator doesn't work, or the ventilator's there to kind of be like a last hope type of thing. But what is that connection then? If the body's trying to heal itself, but then we add the ventilator therapy in there, or whatnot, or treatment, what does that do? Does it do anything?
What the ventilator does exactly is it's actually opening up or sending more oxygen through the body or into the lungs that goes into the bronchioles, that goes into the alveoli. And to help get that oxygen to cross over into lung so it can keep the body going. See what the inflammation does once it's there, it blocks all of that. That's why people essentially suffocate and they die. Because they're not having that reaction of the oxygen moving past into the cells so the cells can regenerate itself, or so that the lung cells can perform the way they want to perform. Because oxygen is one of the main things we need to live. And if the body gets cut off of that, cells can't regenerate. And if the lung cells can't regenerate, then we can't live.
Right, the lungs die. Wow. Or
that's a basic. There's a lot of other things that go on.
Right. Sure.
And this and that, but that's like the basic way of just kind of looking at it.
Man.
I got a lot of questions, Cal, man. I'm sorry to piss you off, man. I'm just saying, I'm loving this.
Yeah.
I got two questions, but I want to stay on the oxygen real quick. Now, you have the periodical chart, as they call it, CO, H2O, things like that.
Elements,
grammar school. Trudy, my question to you is, when you speak in reference to oxygen and the body don't get oxygen, is it true that water has oxygen in it as well? And is that why it's important that they say to drink plenty of water and to stay hydrated, because it's through drinking the water that it can aid against the attack of the virus COVID-19? How is water and oxygen connected, if they are any? If there are any connected?
That is, what they're trying to, I guess what someone was trying to say to that is, oxygen has the same molecules as water, has the same molecules as oxygen in a sense. The water molecule is H2O, whereas the oxygen molecule is O2. If you remove that hydrogen, you can have oxygen. But in order for that to happen, there has to be certain chemical reactions that can ignite that type of breaking of those bonds. And believe it or not, water bonds are not that easy to break. So I can't necessarily say that drinking a lot of water is actually going to help with the releasing more oxygen into the body, because it has to be a chemical reaction that's going on within the cells in order for them to convert water into oxygen. And they do that, but that's a process that has to take place over, once a certain chemical reaction goes in within the cells take place.
Good answer. Pretty good. Sorry, Cal. I had to.
No, don't. That's a great question. I mean, because again, Trudy, a lot of times we assume certain things, but then it's like, no, let's go back. Which is what I learned from taking my science class. It's like, no, ask the question that you feel needs to be asked, even if you feel like it's a redundant question. It's still, don't take it for granted. It's like, no, just don't assume that it is something. Like, ask it. That was it that scientific reasoning? It's scientific. But I want to go into, since we're talking about the molecular and the cells, and I recently saw an article where they were talking about they're starting to have a study or come to some awareness about like mitochondrial DNA, being able to recognize if people who get COVID, if it will be fatal for them or not. And I want to know if you heard about that or what that connection really is, to break it down for us common folk, like where they're coming from.
Okay.
We getting science, y'all. We getting science. Hold with us. Hold tight.
Here again, the information that's been put out on that, there's a lot more to it than just mitochondrial DNA can be detected, in all populations. I don't necessarily know if the research has definitely been put out to state that. But I do know that in the aging population, what that essentially means is that as you get older, your body loses its ability to regenerate cells as it used to when you were younger.
Makes sense.
Okay. So that makes a lot of the older or the Asian population more susceptible to viruses, because if their bodies aren't able to regenerate their cells as quickly, then that can affect their ability to fight off certain viruses. And typically, the cells that most scientists are referring to are the immune cells, those cells that we have to produce to ward off different viruses or different infections that we may have in our body. So what they're finding is that from the mitochondrial DNA, if after a patient has deceased and they're going in and they're finding in their blood that the body is actually releasing a lot of those dead mitochondria, and they're finding the COVID-19 strand in those in those dead cells. So from that, they're determining how severe someone's COVID-19 attack could have been or was, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. It does make sense. Right, because I knew it was more to it than that. And I know, again, correct me if I'm wrong, because please. But in reference to mitochondria in the cell is the energy, kind of like the not the gas, but it is the energy component of the cell. Is that
The mitochondria in the cell is essentially like the powerhouse. It has all of the information that for a cell, and essentially you have the mitochondria. Then inside the mitochondria, you have the nucleus, which has the DNA. So that DNA tells how that cell is supposed to function, how it's supposed to act. So of course, if the mitochondria is attacked, then the body isn't able to. That cell is suppressed and it dies because it's constantly sending out other organelles, which are, I think it's the ribosomes and
lysosomes.
It's another. Yeah, and those are actually organelles that build proteins for the cells. Okay, so if that's being affected, and I think it's lysosomes. I forgot. I'm sorry. I can't. Now you're telling my age. But those different organelles produce proteins. So if the cell's not producing proteins, then it's not able to keep that cell going and regenerating. So once the virus comes in and attacks that, because you have to understand what a virus is. A virus is a single, and like I said, you have to kind of go back to the difference between what a DNA is and what an RNA is. An RNA, a DNA is called deoxynucleic acid. And then you have the RNA is just the riboxynucleic acid. So, and the DNA is where we have a lot of our genetic information. That's where the cell has a lot of this genetic information. Whereas with the RNA actually supplies the DNA. It's like the building block or the building stone for the DNA. So one of the reasons why a virus replicates so quickly is because it's only replicating one strand. And that's what makes it so hard to identify. Whereas if it was double helix or if it was the DNA, you'll be able to recognize it more easily because you have two strands. So what happens is that whenever that viruses, which is that viral RNA goes into a healthy cell, it start attacking those proteins that it's trying to replicate, and it's changing the sequence of what it's supposed to be, and it kills it.
Wow. So it kills that cell, but then it lives on to kind of go to another cell. Yes.
It can live on, and that's typically what happens with cancer. Why you get tumors. But yeah, it can go on and replicate and live, but it's not going to produce the outcome that cell's supposed to produce because it doesn't have its proper sequencing.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm sorry, Cal. Can I?
No, please. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So with that said, the replication and the duplication of the virus that attacks these various cells, I can see why people would want a vaccine because of if they do get it. This is if they are aware. This is what they have to face. The question I have is, can we trust this rushed version of vaccine that's coming out? And why is there more than one version? Because I hear like
Moderna.
Moderna.
Pfizer.
Right, Pfizer.
Yeah.
We got this version, and so please help clear us up with this so-called instant version of vaccine, and it's 2 or 3 versions.
Right. Can we trust this because it's rushed? Typically, whenever a vaccine is being done on the study, they can. I know. Let me back up. Typically, a study or drug is anywhere from 4 to 7 years. Yeah.
I've heard.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
So with the FDA has something where they say they could rush or expedite their review. That all depends on the classification of the drug, how needed it is for the environment, for the world, or whether or not it's needed for a special or orphan or a very acute disease. Typically, in my experience, when a drug is rushed or is expedited, it's usually expedited within 2 to 3 years. That's what I've seen expedited for drugs. With the COVID-19 vaccine, as I said previously, a lot of this research has already been done. So what a lot of companies do, they go back to some of that other research and they bring it into their own research to kind of build off of it. And this is something the FDA is very much aware of. This isn't anything that's, like I said, we all build off of each other through this research. So to understand if this is safe or not, you have to understand the different phases that a drug goes through as it's being developed. And there's 5 phases. You have your preclinical phase, you have phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. Preclinical is typically the phase that is taking place in animals, and it's a very small population. Once it gets to phase 1, we're looking at probably another small population, and they're just studying the effectiveness of the of the drug, or the experimental drug or vaccine, and they're not really looking at the safety aspect of it. It's not until you get into the phase 2, 3, and 4 where it's starting to go more into the safety, how it interacts with other drugs, how it interacts with other disease states, different populations, and things of that sort is where it kind of goes in as you go further along into the study. That's why some of these clinical trials takes anywhere from 4 to 7 years. Depending on the drug, or depending on the study, you can have a study that can last 4 weeks. You can have a study that lasts 2 years, because not only are they studying the effect of the effectiveness, the safety, they're also looking at what are the after effects of the drug in a certain disease population. So in regards to the vaccine, because vaccines replicate because viruses replicate so quickly, they're able to do the clinical trials a little more quickly.
Okay.
So therefore, they're able to get the results. A vaccine clinical trial probably can run anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. Because if you think about with the virus, you typically see it manifest after about 14 days. So that's how you're looking. That's how they're actually running the studies. So your next question was, why are there so many different versions?
Right.
Well, it's the same reason why you have so many different versions of everything else. You have a diverse population. You know, some people may want 1 shot, some people may want 2, maybe it could be 2.
Wow.
You know, sometimes if you're looking at it from a standpoint of what the insurance company may cover, they may only cover 1 shot. So, you know, a lot of these pharmaceutical companies, and I'm going to say primarily pharmaceutical and biotech, because they're primarily the ones that are, you know, running a lot of these trials. They've already gotten their hands on different ways of technology, and now they're just bringing it to the front. And we all getting bombarded with it, like, oh my gosh, what is all this going on?
Right.
Because, I mean, in a nutshell, everybody want to get that blockbuster drug out, that vaccine out, and everybody wants to make sure theirs is working, it's effective, it's safe, so they can make the money. They can make the money. And so that they can say that we were the ones that had that blockbuster drug. We came in there, we knocked it out, because that reputation will continue to follow them.
We saved the world.
Right.
We saved the world. And with the company I work for, which I'm working primarily with pharmaceutical drug development, at this time, I see like all of these companies, all of their clinical trials. So I'm, you know, so yeah, there's some out there that that you probably don't even know about that are coming down the pipeline.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I just found out this week. I was like, I didn't know y'all were doing COVID-19 or doing COVID-19 treatment, and they're like, well, yeah, you know. So it's we're going to be in this for a while. Just know that we're going to be in this for a while.
Wow. That was going to be a question I was going to wait.
Hold on, real quick. So when you say a while, you said quarantine is going to be for a while. You're going to be stuck in their homes for longer time. That's what you mean by for a while? Or you just...
No, I just think that it's no thing to it. I know it, because if it's not going to be this virus, it's going to be another one. The same way, you know, the same way with the flu. I mean, technically, we, as a nation, as a world, as a whole, we probably should have been addressing the flu the same way we're addressing COVID-19. And had we probably wouldn't be in the state that we're in with COVID-19. As a biologist and as a scientist, viruses are around you every day. There's no getting around it.
Right.
So that's why I said that we're going to be in this for a while, because the more people become aware of it, the more people are going to become more apt to it, and there's going to be more discussions. There's going to be more discoveries. Because before we was just kind of like, oh, I got a cold, I'm going into work. Right. And then you spread it around everybody in the office. You know, whereas now it's like, oh, you sick, you can't come in here. Oh, you have a fever, you can't come in here. And technically, just because somebody has a fever doesn't mean they have COVID-19. They could just have flu.
True.
Or they could just have an infection. But it's like I said, it's all those things that are just it puts everybody on high alert now.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, and Trudy, I wanted to mention, like, we were talking about, like, because we had thought, coming from the general public, we're looking at it like this seems pretty hurried, like you said, like very expedient, but like very hurried. And is this vaccine even thorough enough for us to be taking out? Are we guinea pigs? And because I've heard things, people are saying things. Oh, it messes with male and female reproductive systems. It COVID-19 infects your brain, and and I'm like, I'm sure it has some truth to it, but you people take one little seed and run.
Right. Yeah.
They run with it. So like, what are some of the things, I guess, from you being behind the scenes, like what are some of the things that you're seeing that can help us to kind of maybe, I guess, hurry along the process of being not totally immune, but more immune to the virus going forward, or like just practical things in connection to maybe even some of the vaccines coming out that you mentioned?
Yeah, it's like I said, I go back to it's not it's not really anything that we're hearing behind the scenes. On a daily basis, when I'm speaking with my others in the industry, we're all just kind of laughing like, if you just wash your hands.
Yes.
I mean,
oh my goodness.
I cannot stress that anymore, any more so than being aware, because everybody hand sanitizing, but how often are you really washing your hands?
Yes.
I know I've worked in my past life, I've worked in the hospital, and the one thing that they trained us to do is, for every 3 times you sanitize or use hand sanitizer, the 4th time, wash your hands. Go through the full wash. Nails and hands with soap, scrub, applying some friction, run it under the water, take a paper towel and turn the water off. I mean, you're wasting a little bit of water, but okay, One of the things that we all talk about is when you sneeze into your armpit. In the not your armpit, but in the pit of your arm here.
Right.
That kind of blocks that and protects it from spreading. I have a very funny story, but I'm going to say, do not touch the handrails or doorknobs. And I stress this explicitly with my son because about 2 or 3 years ago, my son and I and my brother, who's a microbiologist, by the way, we were in the UK. And we were going down the escalator, and my son touched the handrail. My brother immediately said to him, do not touch the handrail. You are in another country. There's so many people coming through. And my son's like 5, and he's looking at him like, okay, uncle, okay, uncle. And my brother goes into his whole explanation about viruses, how they can spread, and you have different people coming in. But I have to stress that do not touch the handrails, do not touch the door, take a napkin, use it, toss it, so forth. No shaking hands. No shaking hands. Elbow bump. Good. Right.
Yeah.
Hugs. I would probably cut out the hugs.
Okay.
Hugs probably not a good idea. Unless it's somebody in your house and they're not sick.
Okay.
But how much are we really randomly hugging random people?
Oh, that's true. Yeah, I don't random hug. I just a disclaimer, family. I like to hug, but people that I love, what I'm saying? Like,
right.
Not random. But no random.
Yeah, not random. We're not really doing all of that. Be cognizant of your distance, because you don't know with the other person. That doesn't mean that you have to say 6 feet apart, but you don't want to be rubbing all up on them anyway. But like I said, how could we really do that with random people? That's not in our culture.
Right.
I would highly recommend the vitamins, the vitamin C, D, E, and the zinc. Those things help build your immune system. We need to get outside if you can in places where there's plenty of sunlight, because that's where you're going to get your vitamin D. The body naturally produces it. Eat fruits and vegetables because they contain a lot of those vitamins that we need. And like I said, these are all very simple things that we just lifestyle things that we have to change. Eating fatty fish like salmon or tuna because they're loaded in omega-3s. I would probably either cut out or limit a lot of your red meat. That's probably, I'm not saying I'm null and void in that, but really focus on a lot of those omega-3s. Even if you're not a meat eater, flaxseed has a lot of omega-3s in it. I eat it like 3-4 times a day.
Chia seeds too. I do chia seeds.
What now?
I do chia seeds. I do the flax
chia seeds.
Chia seeds,
right?
Too.
They have omega-3s in it as well. Something my son and I just got was these personal air purifiers. And people think we're the coolest people walking around.
Wow.
Really? Yeah, I mean, it's like a little personal air purifier. I got it so we can eventually travel. It's not very big. It has the K95 mask, or the N95 mask. You can charge it with a USB.
Wow.
And it's pretty cool. And it's bringing in some purified air for you. So if we know that we're going to be in a closed space, then that's typically the mask that we wear. Of course, I just said avoid crowded places as much as you possibly can. Use mouthwash with alcohol for gargling. That's something they're not telling you.
Okay.
And I say that because and a friend of mine and I, we were talking about that. It's like there's so many things they're not telling people that people can just naturally do. The alcohol, saline, because that's the next thing I was going to say about doing a nasal rinse, a saline rinse. Salt or saline, alcohol, that denatures a protein. And what do we already say is what a virus is composed of? RNA, which is just protein. So that's a way of killing that virus before it even gets to the part of the body, like in the lungs, where it's not so accessible. Because they find that we were talking about earlier about the inflammation, and the inflammation that comes from the phlegm, where the virus gets trapped in that, and that's how that phlegm goes into the bronchioles and the lungs, and the lungs, the bronchial, and the alveoli, those alveoli sac, and it's carrying that virus. So to prevent that, gargle with the alcohol or alcohol-based mouthwash. Hydrogen peroxide does the same thing.
Okay.
Like I said, people were running around here grabbing hydrogen peroxide off the shelf. I don't really think they knew what to do with it, but it's good for washing out the mouth and killing infections and viruses and things of that sort. I would look at eating foods and drinks that are antioxidants, that are high in antioxidants. Green tea. We can all go on with the list of those. And one thing that they're not telling the population too is if you're going to a place like to pump gas, wear gloves. Wear gloves. I pump gas every day with gloves. Every time I go to pump gas, I always have the glove on. Stick the finger in, pull it out, toss it. And I guess the take home with it is that apply as many layers of protection as you possibly can. If you do decide to get the vaccine, fine. If you don't, I think that there's so many different layers that we can apply that would keep us protected. If you don't.
Awesome.
Yes. Very practical.
Yes, right?
And family, when she said, alcohol, she didn't mean drink it, okay? She said,
right.
Spit it out so that doesn't get you. Don't start going to the club or getting I'm getting the bottles. No. Yeah.
From what I understand, you have your own business, Miss Trudy.
Yes, I do.
So in addition to the science, can you tell us how do you balance them both? And what advice do you have to those who think that that's literally impossible?
Yes.
So tell us about your business and how do you balance it both and inspire others to do it if they think it's impossible.
Well, actually, I have two businesses. I actually have a consulting business where I do quality consulting to pharmaceutical and biotech, clinical research, medical device companies. And I also have a wine import export distributing company.
Wow.
And when somebody asks, okay, how do I balance it all? I honestly have to say it has to go back to when I was a little girl. At the age of 4, I started studying classical ballet. So with that, I've always been accustomed to having to balance my dance with everything else that I do in my life. And I still very much balance dance with, even when I went to college, with majoring in my biology, because I was a double major at one time. So, it's just one of those things that I feel as though feeds off of each other so well, because you do, in the world of the art, you have to be very creative. And you always have to go a little deeper than what you see on the surface. And science is very much the same way. That's why I've heard a lot of terms being coined now, coined the term of STEM, or excuse me, of STEAM.
Yeah, STEAM, right? STEAM, yeah.
STEAM, right. And that brings in the art component of it too. And I've just found that even throughout my career, a lot of people who I know who are in science or STEM type careers, they have that artistic side that they play into as well. So, how do I balance it all? It's just, it goes into what I was saying about doing that research. Once you get onto something else, you just kind of find that it kind of encompasses you, or it embraces you, or it embraces me, and I just go with it. But I'm able to balance out everything else with it along the way. It's just, like I said, I contribute a lot of that to having to juggle ballet and everything else that I did in my life.
Awesome. Would you say that it also includes the word just escaped me, but a connection between the two where they fall together like in line, because you have two different jobs, but if they relate to each other in some kind of way as it relates to your
right.
Okay. Gotcha.
Well, I can definitely say the consulting business definitely relates to what I do in science. But with the wine, is totally off the grid of what I do in science. But the one reason that I went into the wine, not so much because it's the drinking and it's a big social thing, you have fun with it, but I like the science behind it. When you start diving into the science and the making of the wines, it's very scientific. Very intricate, yes. I mean, it embodies everything: the soil, the behavior of the winemaker, the wind, the change in temperatures, how much water you have, and it's amazing. Even the topography of the land affects the quality or the characteristics. I won't say quality, but the characteristics of the wine. And that's what intrigues me more so than anything. It's just that is, I know. With that being said, I'm also a licensed barber.
Oh, wow.
So while I was in barber school, I had discovered like trichology. And as much as I learned cutting hair, I was more intrigued by the trichology aspect of it, because it fell into a lot of that biology, because trichology is how certain chemicals or certain diseases affect the scalp. and certain treatments that you can apply. So I just kind of went down the road with that as well. So, I became a board certified trichologist. And, like I said, it's just the science of it, the science of hair and the scalp and the chemical reactions. That's all very much interesting to me.
Woo! All right. I didn't see that coming at all. It's awesome though, because all those are connected with a little bit of that science, but they're all
connected with science.
And that's so beautiful, because again, you would think, oh, okay, I went to school, got my degree, I'm doing this here, and it's like you're showing us like through these various ventures that it all has this kind of like little like thread, has this thread. And Trudy, when you just talked about the process of the grapes into wine, it made me, like you mentioned something earlier with your grandmother and gardening. So is that kind of the connection too?
Yeah, it's kind of a connection too. It's because she and I grew grapes. But back in the region where we're from was primarily muscadine grapes.
Okay.
So she would show me how to make muscadine wine. And my sister and I used to make muscadine wine, and we had a little clubhouse, and we used to sit in there, and it wasn't we stopped at a point where it became alcohol, but we were country girls, so we didn't care. So everything, and I think a lot of it just comes down to my personality. And anything that's close to me that I hold intimately, I research it to the nth power. That's the reason why I got a master's in education. I primarily got that so I can support my son, because I started as I was doing the research on autism and things of that sort. It just was all the information that was being fed to me wasn't evidence-based information, and I wanted to get the most reliable information that was evidence-based, that had already been researched in study. And I built across this school, Arizona State, and I was like, okay, I was just going to do the certification process, and then they talked me into doing the master's program.
Wow.
And then, in that way, I was just able to learn more about that, so I could be able to better support my son. But even with that, that's an area of science that I didn't even think about, was the behavior sciences, in which I apply even the behavior sciences even to my wine business. Whenever I'm talking to some of the winemakers and their behaviors and how they move and how they treat the plants or nurture the plants, because all of that goes into the characteristic of the wine.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I learned that. I didn't know about that aspect either. Wow. But it makes sense. It's that connection to nature. It's that connection to.
It's the connection to nature.
Yeah. Wow.
All right. Well, I don't have any more questions, Cal. And Miss Trudy gave us the extra minutes. We appreciate you so much.
Yes.
Let me do this tidbit before Cal does. We would like to hear. Well, let me do it. Thank you so much for joining us, Miss Trudy. We hope you had a good time. Final words, parting words you would like to leave with us before we sign off.
Yeah. Just if anyone has any other further questions or any things of that sort, they can always reach me at my company email address, which is info.pieimports@gmail.com, or you can visit my website at www.pieimports.com. Leave me a message, drop me a line, or just whatever. Say that you enjoy this podcast, just whatever you feel.
Okay. And Trudy, is that Pie Import, like PIE Imports, or?
Yes, PIE Imports, right here on my shirt, Pie Imports.
Yes. Right. Hey, gotta promote it.
Definitely last but not least, let me introduce. My name is KAYODE Bentley. Thank you for joining us here. I hope you got some information. We have some bangers. Kyle keeps bringing them. Trudy dropped some gems that I've learned. So to reach me as well as 4ts.org, teaching teens to think, where you get information on youth development and career direction, and also candidate advice, where I share information on relationships, religion, all that other good stuff, and just to help elevate the community and inform the community. So thank you so much, Kyle.
Indeed, yes, family. So you can reach me on Instagram at DIX_KYLE. You can also reach me on Facebook here, which is my name, just Kyle Dixon, KYLEDIXON. Also on Twitter as KEasy773, and also on YouTube as well, Mr. Kyle Dixon.
Right. And don't forget Grand Rising Collective at YouTube.com and Facebook.
Of course, you have to subscribe and like and share the Grand Rising Collective podcast here on Facebook. Join the Facebook group. We love to have you in the collective. As you see, we have lovely people like Miss Trudy Hanna here who come through and really share their knowledge, experience, expertise. So we cannot be more thankful than that. And also we have our YouTube page as well, Grand Rising Collective YouTube. So please subscribe to that. We're trying to get our subs up. All right. We'll be adding more features to our collective with our Patreon page coming soon. Family, we thank you for sharing your time with us. Trudy, Hanna, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. We really appreciate you. You know.
Thank you. You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. So family, again, you know, on that note, we are out. And typically, Trudy, before we leave, we always say peace. So KAYODE, count it off for us.
1, 2, 3. Peace.